Greetings, this is a quick how-to on the city-level participatory slum upgrading index tool prepared by the UN Habitat Participatory Slum Upgrading Program and myself, Dana Thompson. As a reminder, this is the conceptual framework for the tool where city readiness drives community participation, and community participation in slum upgrading further improves city readiness. City readiness is defined by 5 major components, which are shown here in colors, and each of these components has subcomponents, and embedded in those are indicators. Local government activities and outputs are defined across a number of sectors, including land and housing, infrastructure, social services, livelihoods, culture and society, and environment and climate. Now, all of this is taking place in a broader context, and that context will vary from one city to the next. Community participation in slum upgrading is defined by the quality, quantity, diversity, and degree of the communities and people engaged. Community participation is really a key focus here, and so we measure how community participation is taking place across various phases of slum upgrading. The design phase, implementation phase, maintenance of upgrading activities, and monitoring and evaluation of those activities. Within each of these phases, we want to measure quality, quantity, degree, and diversity of participation. Together, 19 indicators are used to define community participation in the beta version of the PSUI. These are the 3 readiness scores that define an enabling environment for community participation in slum upgrading. Local government capacity is defined by 10 indicators that characterize how that government is financed and the characteristics of its institutions, as well as governance practices. For other local capacity, we measure 4 indicators that characterize community capacities, NGO capacities in the city, and coordination across sectors within the city. Within the component Vehicles for Participation, we also have 4 indicators reflecting key figures that are often important for successful participatory upgrading, inclusion of marginalized groups, and the nature of how needs assessments are done. Local government activities and outputs related to city infrastructure and services are, of course, essential for any kind of slum upgrading, and so we measure a number of indicators across these different sectors. At the moment, the tool includes 4 context indicators related to the demographics of the city, general governance structure, and physical environment of the city. We don't currently use these as part of the scoring system, but in the future, we expect that these indicators might modify how the scoring takes place or how the interpretation takes place. Let us go to the tool itself now, which can be downloaded from www.c-PSUI.com. The tool itself has 3 tabs. The first one, which you're looking at, will help you get started. It includes instructions. So first, assemble key stakeholders. Second, answer questions on the Participation Index tab. Third, you can optionally answer the questions on the Readiness tab if you want to calculate city readiness scores. Fourth, you want to discuss and interpret these scores with other stakeholders in the city and decide how you want to use these results. And fifth, we would like you to upload the completed form here to C-PSUI.com so that we can compile results from multiple cities and further refine this tool. This tab also includes a brief overview of why the tool was developed and answers to common questions. As you know, this tool is in beta phase and will be further refined. So we'd really appreciate any additional feedback that you have for us on how this tool works for you and the process itself. Feel free to give us this feedback when you submit your completed document, or contact Joshua Mavidi directly at UN Habitat. Now let us look at the Participation Index tab. Several types of questions are asked. One format is a select one. Another format is to enter a number, and another is a select all that apply. What you see here is a description of the calculation we use to generate a raw score. Sometimes some of these scores are adjusted so that they end up on the same scale and can be averaged to generate an overall score. In the top left, you'll see drop-down menus to choose a country and city. I'm just going to use the example of Lagos, Nigeria. On the Participation Index tab, these values are only here for record keeping. On the next tab, you'll see that we actually use it for calculations. Before I scroll down, let me mention that in the top right is a dynamic score that's calculating your participation index score dynamically as you answer questions. I won't talk through every question because hopefully they're self-explanatory, but I will just mention how this spreadsheet is working. As I mentioned, in some of these questions, you select one answer that best fits your city context. In questions like 1.2 and 1.3, you'll enter counts. In this one, the direct count is used. In question 1.3, we're generating a proportion. Now I've scrolled down to question 2.3 to show you that when you enter values for some questions, for example, I've entered the value 4 for the question, how many communities have new development projects or essential services been implemented? So this number 4 is actually going to show up dynamically in other questions. For example, in 3.1, the question reads, in the 4 communities that implemented new projects or services in the past year, etc. Now I've scrolled down to section 4, monitoring and evaluation, to show you that some of these questions are grayed out. You can't answer them. And that's because if you haven't done any of the activities in question 4.1, then these don't apply. So if you do have a response for question 4.1, you'll see that these cells now become active and you can fill those out. So that should be enough information to get you started with the participation index. Now let us move over to the Readiness Indices tab. As you can see, it's set up in a very similar fashion. Rather than one score in the top right, you're seeing all 5 readiness scores being calculated. In the top left, you also have drop-down menus, so let us go ahead and select Lagos, Nigeria again. And I'm not sure if you noticed, but when we select the city, some numbers appear in the top section. These are grayed out. These are not numbers that you enter. These are pre-calculated from public data sources. So for example, when we select Lagos, Nigeria, it's pre-calculating that the city total population in the year 2020 from the World Pop 1 by 1 kilometer gridded population data set was over 14 million people. Now, if you are working in Lagos and you look at this number and say, that doesn't match at all what we have for our city count, you can optionally override this number by entering a value here. So if you had a totally different value, this value instead will get used in further calculations rather than the pre-calculated value. A couple of these variables related to annual growth rate, governance, and environmental hazards, it's not used below, so we don't have you replace those values up here. You'll also see for context indicators that we don't calculate a raw or adjusted score. That's because they don't feed into an independent component score. And at the moment, we're not really using them. But in the future, these will be used to possibly modify the scoring that we do on these indicators based on if it's a small city or a large city or fast or slow growing city. And we might also have different guidance about how to interpret these scores based on the city context, but that's all coming later. I'm now in the local government capacity section of the tab, and you'll see there's actually some numbers that are already filled in cells that are grayed out, so we can't edit them. And that's being pulled from above, A demographics. Let's go back up and see where that 17 million figure is coming from. So that's the number that we entered as the city population for 2020. If we remove this, what it's going to do is pull this figure from that we pre-calculated instead. And that will get used as the denominator for this ratio. As you scroll through this tab, You'll notice that the questions are formatted similarly throughout, similar to the previous tab. But you'll also notice that there are a lot of questions. There are a lot of indicators in this tab, and we know that there's probably too many to feasibly be filled out by many different stakeholder groups and cities. The aim is to reduce the number of indicators, and the way that we're going to do that is through a very empirical process of statistical analysis. And so that's why we need everybody who is participating in the beta phase to fill out as much as they possibly can and share the question responses with us so that we can reduce the number of indicators or combine some if needed to make this a lot more feasible for future teams to complete, and also to improve how we're creating these scores and how we're doing the adjustments so that the scores are more meaningful for interpretation and usefulness. We really appreciate all the teams that are participating in the beta phase testing of the Participatory Slum Upgrading Index, and hope that you find the process really rewarding and useful. We also hope that you'll share your experience with us. Please contact Joshua Mavidi at UN Habitat if you have any questions or more specific feedback. Thank you so much.